continues to detail the City of Calgary's engagement goals. And the one that I think is absolutely critical is number 7, which reads, providing all participants with the information they need to participate in a meaningful way. And that is absolutely critical. If we are going to get relevant public input, then we have to make sure that the public has the opportunity to become fully informed. If not, then the input will suffer from being uninformed. And we really don't want to make decisions, I think, on uninformed input. So there would be an obligation, and this was my concern. We would get people standing up at the mic who were concerned with the level of tax increase and, you know, cut taxes. But then we would run a survey, and the suggestion is, we like all the services you're giving us. You know, well, if you do, you have to pay for them. So there needs to be that kind of discussion, that kind of awareness, that kind of ability of the public to say, okay, I understand how the money has been spent. I understand what would be the consequence of reducing that expenditure on the services and other things the municipality provides, and I can make a conscious and intelligent decision as to which way I want to go. And that was the purpose of bringing this process in front of council. There is an essential dichotomy within this report, and I'm sure the Director of Finance understands that better than most of us. And that is, if we undertake a very expensive process, we will in fact have to cut things elsewhere. Plain and simple. Because that's exactly what it comes down to. So I think I favor a process that is cautious to start with, that moves fairly slowly, but aims to provide the public with that opportunity for earlier input, and at the same time aims to provide the public with the necessary information to provide us with constructive information, constructive input, and perhaps constructive criticism. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Durham. Councillor Brown, if you have your hand up next.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I too want to thank our staff for this report. Over the years, Council has really struggled with this. It was a few years ago that Councillor Murdoch and I approached the financial officer about putting on our website Budget 101. So if you go to our website, you'll see a very extensive document that talks about how municipal budget is come to and the various things that are incorporated into it. I've heard from a number of citizens that they find that piece of communication very worthwhile, so I recommend it to people to go and review. I do believe that we have to start with asking the public what new participation that they would like to see with the budget. Councillor Durham probably doesn't remember, but we had tried, before he was on council, to do a kind of a participatory budget process, and he was the only one that showed up. Because he's a very detailed guy, and he understood the budget. So, and we've gone out to various areas in Saanich, and hardly anyone's in the audience. Mr. Sherenia was in the audience. So I think we have to ask. So I think starting with the short term, incorporate consultation to develop some new budget process. I think it might come up through our governance review. It's really hard for the public to understand the budget because it has so many different tentacles to it. I mean, even as new councillors, in our first budget process, it was difficult as well. And we decided, and so did the CRD, to develop a 3-year budget process. And now that the election is a 4-year cycle, I just don't know, because I'm supportive of my new councillor friends here, and when we went through the budget process, it was really difficult to understand, and I see it at the CRD, so I don't know about the time frame, but maybe that will come up through the process, that maybe it should overlap so that there's some education for new people. I just want to say that there's so many opportunities to understand that if you really look at our budget, most our budget is protective services. The majority of our budget goes to protective services. And I think council has done a very good job at managing our infrastructure with our little enhanced infrastructure funding of 0.5 now towards that. So we have been trying, but I guess what we're trying to say is that just with our citizen survey, asking our citizens, here's $100, how will you spend it? Maybe that's not quite enough, and they need to understand the budget more so that they understand some of the downloading we're receiving from other levels of government. One of my concerns is a number of items we're taking on and we don't get the financial resources, as has been mentioned earlier, from federal and provincial government. So I think it's a baby step and it's a first step, but we really have to ask our public what they want to see. When I talk to people, they're not really interested in the whole big picture, but they are interested in, well, do you have too many staff, or what about infrastructure? You know, they just want to know where we're at with those sorts of things. So I support the motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Haynes.
Thank you. Okay, today, I mean, this process, I'm really pleased that Councillor Darren brought it forward. One of the things that I think is a great benefit is we're going to start earlier and try to simplify. And it's true, our first year on council, it's a complicated document. And I would ask questions such as, how do we know we need so much sidewalks? And how much sidewalks? And what's the cost? And then you look at the strategic plan and the official community plan integrated to the local plan and the master plan for sidewalks and the master plan for bicycle paths. But once you get your head around some of those concepts, you can start to say, well, where are we going to put in the missing pieces of the bicycle path or the infrastructure? Then you can say, well, over 5 years, what's the cost of that? And over 5 years, if we understand that cost, and we have some fixed cost of staff.
Councillor, your microphone's off.
I apologize. We have fixed cost of staff and protective surfaces, so that we can say, okay, that's the window we can work in, and these are the kinds of amounts it's going to cost, and these are the tax raises, or these are the levels of tax increases we'll be dealing with. And that's the conversation I believe this document will start to let us have. So, and through that process, I hope we embrace more input from the community. So I think it's a very good document. I'm really pleased to see it come forward. And I thank the staff for bringing forward the third level of report. It's quite a lot of work has gone into this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Can you please silence your cell phone? Councillor, it's buzzing. Councillor Murdoch, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Ms. Tinney, the motion on the floor now is for 2B and or not 2B. The report talks a little bit about getting council's feedback on. There's always time for cheap things. About whether or not, or the types of I guess, mechanisms we'd use to get a feeling from the public on how the public would like to be consulted for our budget. And I'm very curious to know, of course, what members of the public would prefer in terms of how Saanich would open up its process for that engagement. The report talks about engaging with a consultant to do that if 2B is supported. And I just wanted to get sort of your thoughts on what a consultant might take us through in order to get that information.
Through the, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Murdoch, one of the challenges for me to answer that question, because in finance we've not done public consultation on any level before, I'm not the one who's best informed to actually provide that information. So I'm going to be looking to my colleagues who do a lot of participation and also touching base with consultants who provide this kind of service to be getting recommendations on what that might look like. So we would, if 2B is adopted, I would be coming back and saying, these are the types of things that are recommended. These are how Calgary started. This is how Edmonton started. This is how North Vancouver started. These are some of the best practices for starting that initial conversation with the community.
Okay, excellent. So that, you've answered what I think would have been my follow-up question. So when you get direction from council tonight, and presumably it will be 2B, you'll then be coming back to us to say, we're now going to engage a consultant and this is the process. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, thanks very much.
Thank you. Any more discussion from council? Councilor Brand.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you to our Director of Finance for the third report. As others have said, I think all three reports have been very beneficial for us, and we should all review them as we move forward. I'm fine with supporting 2B tonight, and I appreciate the recommendation. I'm inclined to support A, and so I like the fact that it's very implicit in the recommendation that A is still viable, which sees as kind of what I would describe as a peak to peak. Every time a new council is elected, we can really set the direction with what we've heard during the campaign and give some input. So thank you for providing that opportunity. I'm wanting to bring in two comments that were made during our public input tonight from Mr. Charania and the education piece. And I think more than anything, it's that continued pursuit of education that we have to do in an environment where people are less and less interested. And I say that with much chagrin. Everybody in this room has taken the time to come here tonight, and you are concerned about our municipality. Sadly, it's the people who are not here that we need to reach. And anything we can do to do that is important. The other piece that was said by Mr. Ferber regarding hiring a staff person, regarding having wonderful consultation, I think that's a real wonderful idea, but I think at this point, with our governance review that's going on simultaneously, I would not be able to support that at this time. That being said, Mr. Ferber, I would encourage you and as 100 friends that you can get, that when we have those meetings, that you come and say, we want a person whose job it is to communicate between council and the citizen. And that will include budget for 6 months of the year, it will include parks for 2 months of the year, whatever that looks like. So at this point, the suggestion, I think, is banked in the back of our heads, but I can't support it as a motion to amend tonight. But the idea of that is important, although I have to admit, I struggle with it because on one hand, you said keep taxes low, but also hire a new person, so there's that constant struggle. And I'm not making fun of you, it's just that's the struggle we have. One final comment, I would hope, Council, that this results in us going out sometime between now and December to talk to people, and that we are not simply going to get another report and delay and delay. If nothing else, we need to go out and allow those residents who do want to talk to us to give that input, and hopefully it's more than just the president of the North Quadrant Community Association. So I will support 2B, and I will let council know that I think we should move towards 2A eventually. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councilor Sanders.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was to say I will support 2B as well, and I thank staff very much for bringing this forward. I think we've been successful over the years of going out to our citizens and asking them where they would like to have their money spent, and that seems to be, apart from Mr. Sharania, who always comes to the annual meetings. So as much as we've gone out, and we've gone to the rec centers, and we've gone to a variety of places, and we sit there, and Mr. Sharania arrives. And that's been going on for as long as I can remember, except for when Councillor Dermott was not Councillor Dermott. I just want to say that as much as I support 2B, when I hate that 2B or not to be, that is the question. Okay, I want to do that. When it goes to the 4-year cycle, my recommendation would be that the cycle would overlap that first year on council to give those new councillors the opportunity to understand the budget process, and then be able to come into the second year of their term successful, and it also lays that groundwork for the next councillor coming out in the following term. So I'm supportive, and that would just be my suggestion on if we would ever move forward to the 4-year cycle. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councilor. And Councilor Burton, the last comment.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I agree with what has been said by my colleagues, and I do support what's before us. And a comment I make, and it's been said in different ways, we need to hear from a cross-section of our community. And I appreciate hearing from all of you tonight, but like has been said, we need to hear from all the different groups that aren't here tonight. And on page 5 and item 6, there's a line there that says, building relationships and partnerships with organizations, stakeholders, and citizens, creating an increased feeling of involvement on important issues. And when I read that, I say to myself, we have to reach out to people who we've never heard from, groups that have never taken the time to come to council and hear what they have to say. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you. Any more comments from councilors? All right, I'll give you some of my own. I'm quite happy to see this forward. I've been watching this as Councillor Dermott introduced this. I do have a little bit of concern, as Councillor Plant does, about the engagement of a consultant of any kind. Certainly, there's a governance process that has been, a review process that has been started. There's a consultant involved with that. I see that this does tie into that somewhat, but I'm also eager to kind of get this going. At a higher level, I'm not sure whether or not we have the appropriate resources internally to engage the public on a regular basis, or whether we seem to be engaging consultants for different projects. How we get that kind of consistency, how we improve the process and not simply rely on the consultants for different things is a concern to me, but I think we can address that when we get to the governance review. So with that, I think I can also support 2B and in almost an experimental fashion and see how it goes forward. Certainly more public consultation is better in my mind, but to get the feedback from the public on the process and see how we can improve it, I think needs to happen as soon as possible. And so with that, I also lend my support. So I'll call the question on the motion then. All in favor? Opposed? Motion is carried unanimously. Thank you. All right, let's move to item C2. Madam Clerk, would you please introduce that for us?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, this next item is a resolution for the Federation of Canadian Municipalities Green Municipal Fund application. The report of the Director of Finance recommending the Council endorse the application for a loan and grant from FCM Fund, and pending the loan approval from the FCM Green Municipal Fund, Council directs staff to make an amendment to the financial plan bylaw. With us this evening is the Sustainability Coordinator for a brief presentation on the application.
Great. Mr. Boyson? Welcome back to the chamber.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Council. Just send out the presentation. Oh, there it is. Thank you. Thank you. So the report before you tonight is asking for your consideration for an application for the Federation of Municipalities Green Municipal Fund. And I'll explain a little bit about the project related to the Gordon Head Recreation Center. So in 2014, the strategic plan committed to reviewing replacement options for the heating system at the Gordon Head Rec Center. So the program from the Green Municipal Fund is designed to support municipalities with financing and resources to move forward projects like the one we're looking at Gordon Head. So the Gordon Head boiler system is a top priority for us in our energy and greenhouse gas reduction targets because of the efficiency of this building. It has some real challenges out of all of our rec centers and our buildings. It's past its service life. The system is oversized and is burning a lot of natural gas. And there's also signs of corrosions and leaks as well. So this boiler system was a prime candidate for us to look at for replacement. And so Rocky Point Engineering was contracted to provide a complete list of options for boiler replacement. This included 4 standard boiler replacement options and 3 low-carbon options as well, including ground and air source heat pumps and biomass. Part of the report was required to provide extensive amount of details on all the different factors that come into decision making for this. And those are some more modern calculations as well that I've got later on in my presentation here. But the review of the options came before our engineering department, working with them and also working with Rec Center at Gordon Head. And also talking with the finance department, we came up with 3 options that were preferred. And one of them was a high-efficiency boiler system, which was sort of what typically we would do right now, would be to just put in a normal, the best, sort of most efficient natural gas burner system. And then the other 2 options that came up positive from the consultant's report were also to consider ground source heat pump hybrid system and an air source heat pump hybrid system. And hybrid means that 80 or 90% of the load of the heat pump system will carry the load, and the other 10% or 20% would be there to handle the peak season loads from the natural gas boiler. So it'd be a smaller gas boiler in the background, and primarily we'd be using the heat pumps. As well, there was also additional building heat system improvements that were identified. There's a lot of different things we could do to this building at the same time. It makes sense to do it now, and it also provided energy and carbon reductions as well. So 3 of those things were to tie in the existing solar hot water system, which right now currently heats the showers at Gordon Head. We're finding the system is working so well that actually we're having to dump some heat because it's working too well, and we're getting, maybe because of all the nice weather we've been getting, but we have to dump heat. It's much more efficient for us to maximize this system, put it into the boiler system and the pool system, so we'll get the most heat out of it as possible. We won't have to dump any heat. Also, several heat reclaim improvements as well will be beneficial, and also control upgrades throughout the system. So, pardon me, here's some details exactly what came into our decision-making process. So we compared total costs, and these costs include additional upgrades and contingency as well. So you're looking at the total cost for these projects to move forward. It includes the energy savings. We compare the GHG reduction, just looking at it straight as a carbon reduction each year. The simple payback, which you can see across the 3 options here for the boilers, were all similar. So that's a positive sign for the low carbon options there, showing us that the payback is the same as what the high efficiency boiler is. And then the last column shows something that I put together about a carbon abatement cost, which we look to see how much carbon is reduced and what the cost is to reduce carbon per year. So we take that total additional cost it requires to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and then also divide it by how much time we're going to get that benefit of a carbon reduction for as well. So you can see somewhere in between here, we looked at the options of the carbon abatement cost, simple payback, the carbon reductions, and working with engineering and the rec center, we decided the air source heat pump would be the best option. The challenge is coming up with the funding, the additional funding that's required for this option. So the Federation of Canadian Municipalities has the Green Municipal Fund, which was described by the mayor tonight, and Councillor Dermott as well, about how it works. We submitted an initial review application. This is just to see if there was test the waters, and they immediately responded back and said, yes, we like this kind of project. So a detailed application is due in the middle of September, and so that'll be a very detailed application, including requires a resolution from council, which is what we're asking you for tonight. How the fund works is that it's an 80% loan, and 15% of that loan is a grant. And that's the key benefit of it, of this, using this financial mechanism, is that we get 15% of the loan as a grant, and it helps reduce the payback. It's a 10-year loan offered at 2.86%. And the philosophy that we'd like to use for paying off these loans is to use the energy savings that we get, which is significant, over $50,000 each year, and also to use the carbon fund. So right now we could use the carbon fund potentially to use for this project, but this would drain the carbon fund completely, and we'd be left without being able to do any other projects. So this year started going back to zero, which is one option. But this is the potential way for us to have continued sustained projects, and maybe potentially a model that we can use down the road as well for other buildings. And so how it would work is that we would have short-term bridge financing secured by the MFA until the final installation is complete. And once the program is fully approved by the Green Municipal Fund, which means meeting all their environmental requirements and financial requirements, that's then we would enter into the loan agreement with them for 10 years. And the last comment I'd like to make is that it does provide a unique opportunity. The City of Vancouver right now is pursuing some aggressive plans for 100% renewable energy. They're looking to put together a plan in September, and I've been in consultation with them as well about what is it going to be 100% renewable building. Because we're making a shift here potentially from natural gas to much more of an electrical load from hydroelectricity, we have an option to potentially turn this building into a 100% renewable energy project. So taking a building like Gordon Head, which is typically large municipal, challenging building for energy retrofits, into this kind of storage, there's that potential for us And how we would do it is by purchasing renewable energy purchases. At least that's my understanding at this point. The City of Vancouver is doing extensive research right now to figure out how they're going to turn their buildings and all the buildings in their municipality to 100% renewable energy. So there's going to be some information coming to us, hopefully before we send in my final submission here as well in September. But there's an opportunity now to get, for BC Hydro, to get that extra 10% of the hydro mix, purchasing renewable energy credits for electricity, and also Fortis provides renewable natural gas now, and there's a couple of other providers as well. So that's it for my presentation. I'd be happy to take any questions that you may have.
Thanks. Just a couple quick questions for you before we start. What's the difference in the rates between what Green Municipal Fund will loan us and the MFA rate?
Mr. Mayor, the rate through the Green Municipal Fund is 2.86. MFA currently, they give a suggested rate, they don't know until they actually go out and do the bond issue, is currently 2.41. So MFA is slightly less, but the grant portion still offsets and makes the Green Municipal Fund a better option.
Okay, thank you for that. My next question I had it here. Timing-wise, that's my next question. Sorry for that. When a lot of these grant applications come back, they tend to come back with a form letter that says the fund was oversubscribed, in other words, too many people applied, and they simply weren't able to fund it. Does this fund work any differently, or what is the likelihood of us getting this funding, in your experience, by your estimation?
Yeah, it's an estimation. I guess it's that there's interest, received interest from the FCM, the Green Municipal Fund program managers, that they like this project. But no, there's no guarantee that they will fund it, but potentially we could be funding this with MFA funding as well, which has, you know, the lower rate as well that we could potentially receive. But the likelihood of it is hard to predict. I think it's a very favorable project. I think the greenhouse gas emissions for one particular building is very high, and I think they'll like that. I think for us and for our community that there's a lot of larger buildings that have natural gas boilers, and in the 1960s and 70s there were a lot of big boiler systems that were built a little bit too big sometimes, a little bit oversized, just to make sure to compensate for the extra loads. And I think it's back when energy was a lot cheaper and we weren't so concerned about greenhouse gas emissions. So I think now this could potentially be a model for all kinds of buildings in our community if we can make this one work.
Thank you for that. My third question is just about the advice that came back from the consultants, and there's a difference between air source and ground source. And the way I understand air source pumps working is that they tend to scale linearly as a house size, and there's a commercial building size, and you can go up. But there's quite an investment to be had for a ground source type of heat exchange heat pump system. When you go down to Dockside Green, there's an energy building down there. It's a blue building down on Harbour Road. And what they did is they put it in at a cost, and they pump some of the heat down a white pipe that runs down the road that most people can't see. And the energy is then received at the Delta Point hotel, and they make use of it. So I'm wondering if the consultants looked into the initial upfront cost of getting this in the system, but being able to provide a benefit into the neighborhood, whether it's at Howard Johnson or something like that, to reduce the return on the investment or to get better greenhouse gas results, get a better result for our community.
Yes, through the mayor. So we didn't do an assessment. We looked at sort of potentially distributing out of the property, mostly because it's a Gordon Head Rec Center in the middle of the residential area. So there could potentially be the area nearby, but no, we primarily focused on when it came to the ground source heat pump option and looking at that, the amount of space that was required of our fields. There's a large field right next to the Gordon Head Rec Center. And we'd have to go beyond that. It's not enough space. We'd actually have to go out into other fields as well. So there's some feasibility issues around that. It could be something down the road, potentially we could consider of linking into other buildings and sharing energy services potentially with, say, the school next door is one example I was thinking of. So that might be something to consider down the road. I know that this type of technology is something school districts is looking at as well. And we've used that as an example to look at to see, to verify that this type of technology could work for us.
Thank you for that. That sounds very good to me if we get to that point in the future, because we're all separate organizations with the school board and the municipality and UVic nearby, and and to be able to coordinate on some larger scale project that benefits us all would be great. Thank you for answering my questions. With that, I'll turn it over to Council, and I'll go to Councilor Murdoch, Renouf, and Sanders.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Mr. Boyson. Thank you very much for what you presented to us this evening, and I'm delighted to see us pursuing this kind of an opportunity. I think it's a terrific use of the fund, and I'm even more pleased to hear that you're hearing excitement about our application and enthusiasm for us to move forward. So that gives me confidence that we will be successful, and I'm hopeful, of course, that we will be. We've, in response to one of the mayor's questions, you talked about, through our Director of Finance, the difference between MFA and the Green Municipal Fund. What I'm curious about is what's referred to in the report as short-term bridge financing. And what I think happens in this case is that we go out and secure all of the money. And then when we get through to completion, we turn over our receipts, I guess, to FCM, and we'll get 80% of those costs back with 15% in grant, covered by grant. What I'm wondering about is if we go out and apply for that funding and we're unsuccessful, not through MFA, but through the FCM fund, we're then left holding the bag on the entire cost of the project. So do we know, I guess you can't give me an estimate on what kind of cost we might be looking at in terms of the amortization, but what sort of impact does that have if we aren't successful in securing the FCM loan?
Thank you. Through the mayor, the potential that the GMF gives us is a total of about a $70,000 saving when you factor in all the differences between the two loan programs. So it's significant enough to go GMF, but it's not significant enough to derail the project if we don't get that funding. Borrowing straight through MFA at their rate, I think it would extend the payback by 1 year, given the $70,000 in the annual payment, so it's not enough to derail it. So either option is viable. So we're going to go and save $70,000 if we can't, and if that's not possible, then